right, so first of all, can you tell me a little bit about your background as it relates to Batterers Intervention Services?
Sure. My name is Terry Moore, and I started out in the late 1980s as a substance abuse counselor. But my really area of interest was in work with violence and abuse. And I started Nonviolent Alternatives, my business, in the early 1990s. And for many years, I did what's known as a traditional Duluth model.
Mm-hmm.
And most people recognize that because they see the power and control wheels. And I still use a lot of Duluth material, and Duluth model has influenced the model that I've worked on and developed over the years. But the model I practice now, I call it cognitive accountability training. And it's real close to Duluth. The emphasis is just a little bit different. But I'm doing research right now with a researcher from IU that's a PhD criminologist, studying our model and the effectiveness of the model.
So how would you describe a Batterers Intervention Program?
Well, I think
an effective one, of course.
An effective one. Okay. One of the things that I feel I need to say first is to talk just a minute about what it's not. Okay. A Batterers Intervention Program is a very specialized program. It's not treatment. There is no biopsychosocial assessment. There is no treatment plan. There are no progress notes. You could think of it more as a batterer's education program than a batterer's treatment program. And there's a lot of reasons for that, because the nature of an abuser is that psychologically they're going to shift accountability away from themselves towards someone else or something else. I call it blame shifting. There's a lot of names for blame shifting. AA 12-step programs call it stinking thinking. Mm-hmm. Substance abuse programs call it denial. Most therapists or clinicians call it resistance. Criminology research calls it criminal thinking. But basically what it is belief systems or ways of thinking that remove myself from personal accountability for my actions. And most of us, inside of us, I believe all of us, have this thing inside of us that tells us right from wrong. In psychology research, they call it internal locus of control. Mm-hmm. I just call it a conscience or a PGS. PGS, cars have GPS that tell them which way to go, so we as people have personal guidance system that tell us which way to go. And our PGS is trying to get us to make the right choices in life, to have good outcomes, to keep and protect the things that we love and value and care about. Well, the PGS works by making determinations and judgments based on the categorical imperative, moral imperative, or what we think of typically more common as the golden rule, treat others how I want to be treated. So in our program, we define abuse as anything I say or do that I wouldn't want said or done to me. Mm. So when abuse rises to a level of frequency or intensity that it brings intervention, systematic intervention like DCS or the court system or something like that, then it's increased quite a bit.
Absolutely.
But we believe in trying to teach accountability all the way down to the smallest levels of abuse, thinking that if we can challenge those smallest levels of abuse, it's not as likely to escalate to the more intensity and frequent. And so the Batterers Education Program is about identifying abuse and what it is, and that it's not just beating someone up, mm-hmm. that there's a whole range of abusive actions and words, and you can be abusive with just a look in your eyes, mm-hmm. So bringing awareness of the different levels of abuse, and then also bringing awareness into the thoughts or belief systems, the cognitions that support or justify or excuse those actions. Because what's happening is an abuser has ways of thinking where they override their conscience, if you will, and convince themselves that their abuse is justified or not as bad as everybody thinks it is, justify, minimize, make excuses. But an abuser calls it the reason. The reason I did this, right? The reason I did this was because they were doing this, and that was wrong, and I had no choice. I had to do this, right? Well, all of it, 100% of human beings are abusive. Everybody says and does things that they know they shouldn't, okay? But everybody doesn't rise to the level where it creates the kind of problems that we see in our work. But everybody provides justifications. For example, probably, you know, I taught a workshop a while ago in a county that I work in with it was a group of defense attorneys. And I said, you know, on the way driving up here today, I was thinking it sure would be nice if the speed limit wasn't 65, you know, because I'm a safe driver, my car is well maintained, I'd like to be able to go faster, right? And I said, who would be with me to put on the fall ballot to do away with speed limits? And a couple of people raised their hand, you know, and I said, well, everybody else doesn't believe we should. And I say, well, why not? They say, well, you might be a safe driver, but we got to protect ourselves from the other ones who aren't.
Right.
Okay, and so I said, okay, so they've made all these arguments why we need to, for the safety of children and safety of everybody, we need to have these speed limits. And I said, so I can make an assumption then that since you attorneys in here are basically the leaders of this community, and you believe in the system and you believe in the laws that are in place, so I can make a presumption that none of you have violated the speed limit today. Right. And of course, I said, who's violated the speed limit today? Well, about a third of them raised their hand. I said, okay, well, who's violated the speed limit in the last 30 days? And I got everybody with that one, you know.
Sure.
And so I said, well, okay, you bunch of criminals. I mean, you tell me that you believe in your mind and your heart and your conscience that these speed limits are necessary, yet everyone in here violates these things. I said, well, somebody explain that to me. And so they start saying, yeah, but the speed limit is this, but I was running late, or I'm just going with the flow of traffic, or the police will give you 5 miles an hour over. In other words, these are all excuses and justifications that they're providing to override the guilt that they feel in their conscience for doing something that they know is wrong. Mm-hmm. And this blame-shifting justification is a common theme with all abuse. Mm-hmm. That there's always the excuses and the justifications. And most of these excuses and justifications, this way of thinking, is at such a deep habit level that an abuser really believes what they're saying. And so if you're talking with them, it appears they're being very honest. And it's hard to not get hooked in and buy some of the stories sometimes. Okay. Well, a Batterers Intervention Program, our job is to challenge and to teach personal accountability. But the whole mindset is different than any other type of counseling or therapy, because the person that's in our class is not our client. Batterers Intervention Facilitator is an advocate for victims of violence who happens to be working with perpetrators. So my first obligation and duty and responsibility is to be concerned about the people that they go home to and the people in society, and that overrides the agenda of the person in the room. And so it puts me in a little bit of an ethical dilemma too. Everybody that signs into a Batterers program has to sign a waiver of confidentiality. They don't sign notifying them that they have confidentiality. They have a waiver of confidentiality, that what we learn in the program is not confidential, and that we have duty and responsibility to be communicating with others the best we can if we perceive that there's a risk or a danger or a threat. It puts us in an ethical bind, though, is that we can never say or do anything that advocates on behalf of the abusive person, because the abuser is so strong in their belief systems of the justifications and excuses, and we can get trapped into that.
Absolutely, sure.
And thus we it's called colluding.
Collusion, yeah.
Colluding when we buy into what they're saying. And so we have a duty not to report we think they're doing good, we think they're progressing somehow, because that becomes a safety issue then. They can come in and tell us things, and we get fooled, and so we report that, and then the case manager or the courts make a judgment or a decision based on that, and then there's danger there.
If an FCM makes a referral to a Batterers Intervention Program, you spoke a little bit to it, but more specifically, what type of documentation can they expect to receive?
What they should receive is they should receive documentation verifying compliance as far as attendance, any reports of incidents of abuse that we become aware of, any violations of the program rules. They should be notified of those things. What they will expect often but won't receive is for us to say, this person's really doing really good. Mm-hmm. By policy, I never make that kind of statement because I'm seeing this person 90 minutes, there's 168 hours in a week, and I'm seeing this person for 90 minutes in a group of 20 people.
Sure.
And so I consider that a safety risk, and I actually consider it to be an ethics violation for me to do something like that. So I will never make statements that this guy is doing really good or I think it's safe now. I won't ever do that. I only document compliance with the program rules, attendance, and any incidents of violation of rules or abuse. The people in our program are attending a class with 20 people in the class, 18, 20 people in the class. And I'm not spending time in the class talking with each person about their own individual issues. Sure. Okay, because we're in our class, we're using the model, the intervention model that we're using is psychotherapeutic, but we show a video at the beginning of the class. Often we use the Duluth videos, and it's 2 or 3 minutes long, and it shows a person being abusive in this video. And then we process in the whole class, spend the whole class talking about what did they say or do that was abusive, what were they thinking, what were they feeling, what were the justifications that they provided, how did they make it okay for them to do these things that they know are wrong, what's going to be the outcome of that, what could they have done different. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm not spending time with individuals in that class
to where you can make an assessment.
to where I can make an assessment or a determination. So if I'm doing this type of strategy, if you put me in a position where you say, well, I can't send people to you unless you send me progress about how that person is doing, well, ethically I have to say, well, okay, I'm sorry, don't send me anybody then, because for me to send any kind of reports like that, to me is an ethical violation of what I do. Well, the videos, the scripts for the videos are based on, most of them are based on the themes that are on the Duluth Model Power and Control Wheel. And when they first developed that, there was research supporting that these were typical types of behaviors that an abusive person was doing. And so by using the different videos every week, we're touching on different themes. But the process that we're doing in the program is a repetitive process, because we learn through repetition. And so challenging these ways of thinking, these justifications, and applying it to different situations, what happens is you can almost see it in the class where people in there, it's like a light bulb goes off. Oh, I've done that, I've said that, and oh my God, I didn't realize I was being that abusive.
How long is the class? I mean, is it 10
about an hour and a half.
Okay, and is it
26 weeks?
26 weeks.
Okay. Yeah, the minimum in the standards is 26 weeks. This is not an anger problem. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you're dealing with substance abuse, you don't send them to a craving intervention program.
Right.
You send them to a substance abuse program, and the whole focus of the program is dealing with the use or abuse of the substance. And we are here to deal with violence and abuse, not with feelings of anger. One of the problems that if somebody gets sent to an anger management program, on my website I have some policy statements, and I have one that touches on the difference between anger management and a BIP, and let me find it here. I want to just read a couple of lines off my position statement. The first goal we have when providing services to an abusive person is to challenge the tendency to mislabel the problem as anger. Anger management treatment and anger control therapy attribute an abusive person's violence to a momentary outburst of anger as opposed to tactics of power and control and manipulation. From most accounts, domestic abuse is actually systematic terror inflicted upon victims through direct or indirect controlling, manipulating, and degrading behaviors. It is not merely a series of impulsive, angry incidents, but often premeditated, systematic, debilitating power and control tactics. Now, everybody who's abusive is going to feel angry at the time because there's power and control, leverage, and advantage in showing anger.
Sure.
Okay, but if I'm talking to a man who was arrested for domestic violence and he's in my program and he's mad that he's got to be there, he doesn't think he has to be there, well, then I say, why didn't you say and do the things to the judge what you did to her? Why are you not saying or doing the things to me that you did to her?
Because it's not an anger issue, right?
It's not an anger issue. You can be angry at me, but you're not going to beat me up.
Right.
You can be angry at the judge, but you're not going to beat the judge up. Why not? Well, because I don't want to go to jail. Oh, so you're only going to use this abuse when you can get away with it, and only to the extent that you can get away with it. Because they'll yell and holler at me and cuss at me, but they won't cross a line because they're afraid they'll go to jail if they do.
Sure.
So, let me just read something else. Anger programs focus on the premise that an abusive person is unable to control certain violence or anger tendencies as a result of a triggering factor. This approach supports two dangerous myths: that the victim shares responsibility for the violence because they trigger it, and the abuser is not responsible for the violence because they're unable to control it. Thus, anger management tends to decrease abuser accountability and can even reinforce the abusive person's tendency to blame the victim. The treatment focuses on what makes the abusive person feel angry, resulting in the abusive person focusing on what they feel the victim has done wrong instead of their own behavior. Okay? This is particularly harmful in light of the fact that an abusive person taking responsibility for past abuse is an essential part of successful change. So, anger management actually can create more abuse rather than alleviate abuse.
Right.
So if you send someone to anger management therapy or treatment, then you could actually be making things worse than making things better.
What about couples counseling? I mean, how would you rank that as opposed to, so we've got anger management here, couples counseling as opposed to batterers intervention?
Well, for one thing, if you put a couple together, okay, if the man's being abusive to the woman and you put the couple together in the room, you're putting her at risk, because if she says the wrong thing, when they leave that room, he's gonna retaliate for her saying the wrong thing. It's don't air my dirty laundry in public, and this is all your fault anyway. So if you put them in a room with couples counseling, it's going to increase the anger, and she's just going to sit there and take all the blame for everything because she doesn't want to be abused when they leave. So it's totally non-productive. It's a waste of resources. It's not going to work. If we're looking at master's level clinicians, up until recently, I mean, now we've got licensed clinical addiction counselors, but before this we had licensed clinical social workers, licensed marriage family therapists, and licensed mental health counselors. None of the the requirements for those licenses have any requirement for domestic violence training.
Wow.
None of the graduate programs that feed those licensures have any requirements for domestic violence training. None of them.
Right.
And so basically we're making this broad assumption that because this person is a licensed clinician somehow, they're going to be able to work with this person. Well, they have no training in this.
That's a very good point.
They have no training in this. But they don't know what they don't know.
Sure.
They don't know what they don't know. And so they'll take the clients and they'll try to work with them, but they'll use inappropriate things. Like, for example, if I'm a clinician, well, I've heard this happen many times. I'm a clinician and I've got this guy sent to me for counseling and he's abusive. Well, say Joe has an appointment with me at 11 a.m. on Monday. Okay, well at 9 a.m. I get a phone call from Joe's wife and say, you know what Joe did this weekend? He did this and this and this and this. So I think, okay, fine. So Joe comes in at 11 o'clock and I say, I hear you had a rough weekend. You know, let's talk about it. Well, what's Joe going to do when he leaves? He's going to go home and retaliate on her for calling and ratting him out.
Absolutely.
And because that clinician wasn't sensitive to that dynamic,
Right.
because that clinician didn't have the proper training.
Right.
That's why this is a very specialized thing that needs to be dealt with people that are properly trained.
Yeah.
And so, in my opinion, you should not refer abusers to a program that is not ICADV certified, because that certification is the only thing that you have to guarantee that this person has got some minimum level of training in domestic violence and the dynamics.
Yeah.
If you don't have a batterers program that is ICADV certified in your area, then I don't think you should be sending the abuser or the batterer to anything.
Mm-hmm.
Because the best thing to do in that case is to be trying to get the victim connected with resources to work out safety plans, support groups, options for them to protect themselves and escape if they need to. Because any type of counseling or therapy that you send the abuser to that doesn't understand this process is likely to make the problem worse rather than better. And also, it's given false hope to victims, and it's given false hope to you as the case manager, and it's given false hope to the judge,
Mm-hmm.
and it's probably not going to work. It's very unlikely to work, and it's much more likely to increase the danger rather than decrease the danger.
Yeah,
So,
that makes sense.
so if you don't have a certified batterers intervention program in your community, then reach out to certified programs that are nearby and try to talk to them about offering services in your community.
Well, Terry, I just really want to thank you for coming and doing this interview and talking with me about some of what you do around the state. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. I'm glad I hope it helps.